Okay, let's unpack this. What makes a Dungeons and Dragons campaign truly unforgettable for you? Is it, crushing the biggest monster, finding mountains of gold, wielding the most powerful spell, or is there something else, something deeper?
Yeah, I think many of us have those campaigns that just stick, right? And often it's not really the stat block of the final boss. It's a moment of genuine connection, maybe a surprising act of vulnerability or a consequence that really, really hit home.
Absolutely. I was just thinking about a game where a character had to make this incredibly tough sacrifice, and the feeling around the table in that moment, it was electric, so quiet, tense.
Yeah. Totally unforgettable.
Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of thing we're diving into today. We're looking at how to intentionally weave that kind of emotional depth into our tabletop role-playing games. And we're pulling insights from an article by Isaac Hansen over on LitRPG Reads. It's called How to Make Your Dungeons & Dragons Campaign More Emotional and Memorable. His core idea, really, is that emotional depth isn't just some nice bonus. It's the alchemy, he calls it, that turns a good game session into a story players actually carry with them.
Yeah, that alchemy, I like that. It's about making the game feel less like just a challenge to be won and more like a compelling shared narrative we're all creating. So where do you even begin if you want to invite that kind of alchemy to your table?
Well, the article really kicks off by establishing why this focus on emotion matters so much in the first place. Points out that TTRPGs are, uniquely powerful because they create these shared emotional experiences in real time. It's not passive, like watching a movie. It's felt directly by everyone playing together right there.
Right, you're sort of building the feeling collaboratively right in the moment. And when there are real emotional stakes involved, suddenly everything feels more significant, doesn't it? A simple travel scene isn't just getting from A to B. It can be like a time for quiet introspection. A battle isn't just hitting things until they stop moving. It can be about protecting someone you genuinely care about. Even downtime, it takes on more meaning as characters process stuff.
Exactly. And think about the difference, a game focused purely on mechanics and loot versus one layered with emotional resonance. One might be fun for an evening, sure, but the other, that's the one that creates the lasting memories, the stories you're still retelling years later. It feels less like, optimizing a board game and much more like you're co-writing a novel where the character journeys and the consequences actually truly matter.
That connection to a co-written novel, yeah, that makes so much sense. It shifts the focus back to the story part of role-playing. So, okay, that's the why. How do we actually start building this narrative? The article suggests starting with the characters themselves.
Yeah, it talks about building emotional arcs for characters. And this isn't just about leveling up stats or getting new gear. It's about a journey that changes a character fundamentally over time, a kind of growth that goes way beyond the numbers on the character sheet.
And this isn't something the DM just dictates, right? The article emphasizes collaboration. How does that actually work in practice?
It really means talking with your players, asking them what kinds of stories move them. What would genuinely break their character's heart? What do they secretly dream about? Who do they trust implicitly, or who do they deeply distrust?
So session 0 becomes really crucial for this whole process.
Oh, absolutely vital. That's the perfect time to plant these seeds, ask those kinds of probing questions, and to weave player desires and character backgrounds right into the fabric of the campaign from the very beginning.
The article gives some really concrete examples too, which is helpful. Things you could discuss or build plots around, like avenging a lost loved one.
Or seeking acceptance from a group or maybe society, wrestling with some haunted past trauma.
Healing from a deep betrayal, finding a true home after being lost or exiled, maybe even learning to forgive an old enemy. Stuff like that.
Yeah, listing those possibilities really helps make the abstract idea of an emotional arc much more tangible, doesn't it? And it stresses, importantly, that these arcs shouldn't feel forced or like some preset script the player has to follow. They need to feel earned. They should grow organically out of the choices the character makes and the events they experience throughout the campaign.
Okay, so we're thinking about characters and their personal journeys. But characters don't exist in a vacuum, right? What about the world they actually inhabit?
Right, and that leads really naturally into the next point, emotional world building, which is a fascinating concept in itself. The idea that the setting itself can evoke feeling. It's not just describing mountains and rivers, it's building a world that carries its own emotional weight, almost like it's another character in the story.
Yeah, I can picture that like a village that's still visibly reeling from some recent tragedy, where the quiet streets and the somber faces tell a story of sorrow before anyone even says a word.
Exactly. Or maybe as a sprawling city that's right on the edge of revolution,
Yeah.
just buzzing with this mix of fearful tension and desperate hope. You feel it.
And this extends to the people in that world too, right? The NPCs, the
Mm.
factions. They shouldn't just be quest dispensers.
No, definitely not. They should have their own complex emotional histories, old rivalries that still sting, shared griefs that bind communities together, secrets hidden behind polite smiles.
So you're not just building lore, you're building emotional history into the setting itself.
Precisely. The article lists ideas like cursed towns where sorrow just lingers in the air, or lands haunted by the trauma of ancient wars where the descendants still feel the echoes.
Or even like cultures known for these huge, boisterous celebrations that actually mask some deep collective grief underneath it all.
Or shrines where people leave little offerings for lost dreams. Factions whose current goals are driven entirely by betrayal that happened generations ago.
Yeah.
These aren't just background fluff, they're emotional hooks. They make the world feel real, layered, and like there's something truly worth fighting for, or protecting, or maybe even mourning.
And those NPCs you mentioned are so key to this, aren't they? The article actually calls them the emotional lifeblood of the game.
They absolutely are. Often, NPCs are the anchors. They tie the party to the world and give them reasons to care beyond just finishing the main quest line. Building those strong bonds, whether it's with allies, mentors, or even really intriguing nemesis, it significantly raises the stakes for the players.
Because suddenly you're invested in their fate, not just your own character's survival. And the article points out that NPCs can also serve as like mirrors or foils for the player characters, right? Forcing them to confront aspects of themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And there are just so many ways to make NPCs emotionally compelling. Think about a wise old mentor who secretly fears they're losing their protege to a dark path, or an enemy soldier who's starting to question the morality of their orders.
Or maybe a former friend who's now a bitter rival because of something that happened years ago. Even a simple villager who's just racked with survivor's guilt after a monster attack.
A stoic ally who's hiding a terminal illness. A seemingly powerful noble wrestling with some deep-seated shame. These concepts, they aren't just stat blocks. They're prompts for real interaction, the kind that builds genuine player-NPC bonds.
And like the article notes, when those bonds are strong, every threat, every choice, every single battle just matters more.
It really brings that human element right to the forefront, doesn't it? Reminds everyone at the table that the relationships are just as crucial as the plot points.
Okay, so we've got character arcs, an emotional resonant world, compelling NPCs. How do we actually bring this emotional layer into the moment-to-moment gameplay? Like into the encounters themselves?
Right. This is where the focus shifts a bit. It moves beyond just physical danger and mechanical challenges. The article talks about designing emotionally charged encounters. These aren't just fights or skill challenges. They can be fundamentally about things like regret or love or doubt or sacrifice. The goal is for players to grapple with the moment emotionally, not just figure out the optimal tactical move.
So what happens during the encounter isn't just what skill check they make or how much damage they deal, it's why they're doing it and what it actually means to their character.
Exactly that. An encounter could pose a tough moral dilemma like, do you protect these innocent townsfolk, or do you let the villain escape with the artifact? Or maybe it's a confrontation with a ghost from a character's past that forces them to relive a painful memory. The article gives some great examples designed specifically for this kind of impact.
Yeah, I saw those, like The Last Stand, which is explicitly designed to explore sacrifice, or Ghosts of the Past, focusing on regret.
Crossroads Duel, which is all about betrayal. The Plea for Mercy highlighting compassion.
These aren't just combat scenarios with a different name, they're like emotional pressure tests.
They really are. And a key takeaway here is that winning one of these encounters, it might not feel like winning in the traditional sense. It could come at a significant emotional cost. Maybe a sacrifice had to be made, a difficult truth confronted, perhaps even a relationship shattered. That cost is the point. It's the core of the encounter's emotional design.
This all sounds fantastic for adding depth, but how do you actually get players to lean into this emotional side? What if they're shy or maybe just uncomfortable with that kind of thing?
That's a really, really important question, and the article definitely tackles it under helping players get emotionally invested. The absolute foundation for all of this is creating a safe table culture. Vulnerability isn't something you can demand, right? It has to be encouraged, and critically, it has to feel safe.
So the DM leading by example is pretty important here, showing that it's okay to roleplay a character who feels genuine fear or sadness or even overwhelming joy.
Absolutely. If the DM isn't afraid to portray characters with complex, messy feelings, it sends a strong signal that it's welcome from the players too. But perhaps even more crucial is the emphasis the article places on safety tools.
Ah, okay. Like using lines and veils or the X card, tools like that.
Precisely. And these tools aren't just about avoiding, say, explicit content. They're fundamentally about giving players control over potentially triggering material. They ensure everyone feels secure enough to engage at whatever level of emotional depth they are comfortable with in that specific moment. It can change session to session.
Yeah, that makes sense. So discussing boundaries explicitly back in session 0, checking in with players during or after really intense moments, and always respecting discomfort. Those are highlighted as just non-negotiable, right?
Totally non-negotiable. It's all about making sure that pursuing emotional depth in the story never comes at the expense of a real person's well-being at the table.
And when players feel truly safe and know they have that agency, they're much more likely to feel comfortable taking those emotional risks with their characters, to invest deeply in the shared narrative we're building.
That trust is everything.
Okay, so let's say you're incorporating these elements, you've got player buy-in, things are clicking. How do you manage the flow of emotional intensity? It can't just be relentless, heavy drama all the time, surely.
No, absolutely not. That would be exhausting. The article makes a great analogy here. Emotion needs rhythm, kind of like music does. A relentless, nonstop barrage of high-tension emotional moments. It just becomes draining rather than engaging after a while.
So breaks are crucial then. Lighter moments.
Vital. Absolutely vital. That's where things like comic relief or just quiet downtime come in. They provide essential decompression, and they often create space for more authentic, unforced character interactions. Sometimes the biggest emotional truths come out in those quieter moments more subtly than in the big dramatic scenes.
Like just having characters talk around a campfire after a harrowing fight, or maybe taking a quick out-of-character break mid-session just to breathe and reflect.
Yeah, or even in-world moments. Participating in a quiet ritual of remembrance for someone who was lost. Stuff like that.
The article mentions downtime sessions, little vignettes focusing on friendships or family.
Exactly, all powerful pacing tools. And another really important point it stresses is the value of aftermath scenes. Don't just wrap up a huge emotional event, a betrayal revealed, a major sacrifice, and immediately jump to the next plot point. Let the characters sit with what just happened. Let them process their feelings, maybe talk to each other about it, or just be quiet together.
Right. Letting those moments linger allows the emotional impact to actually land and become part of the character's ongoing experience, rather than just a blip.
It makes the whole story feel much more lived in.
Yeah. Which brings us to something that can definitely happen when you successfully invite this level of emotion to the table, which is real emotions showing up. For real.
Yes, the article touches on that directly. Handling real emotions at the table. It acknowledges that when players get deeply invested, real tears or frustration, maybe even anger or overwhelming joy, these things can surface. And it says, look, recognize this primarily as a sign of powerful engagement, which is good, but also handle it with care and responsibility.
Okay, so what does that look like, practically speaking?
It means reading the room, first and foremost. If a moment seems to be hitting someone at the table harder than perhaps expected, it's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. It's necessary to pause the game. Check in with that player, out of character, make sure they're doing all right, offer them space if they need it, no questions asked.
And post-session debriefs can be really helpful too, right? Just a chance to step out of character, talk about what happened, how it felt for everyone.
Definitely. A great tool for processing. And just reiterating, again, that safety and consent are paramount. Always support players who need to step back or disengage from a scene for a moment. That's the priority.
Clearly signaling when you're speaking as your character versus as yourself is probably key too, especially when things get intense.
Oh yeah, essential for managing potential misunderstandings when the role-playing gets that deep and emotions are running high.
Okay, so putting all these pieces together then, we've got character arcs that evolve over time, a world that feels deeply affected by its history and events, NPCs that players genuinely form bonds with.
And encounters designed not just for challenge, but to specifically challenge the heart, a culture of safety and trust to the table, and that mindful emotional pacing.
What does that all create when it comes together?
Well, it weaves that rich emotional tapestry the article talks about. It's how a character's personal journey, their arc, interacts with the scars of the world around them. It's how those relationships with NPCs suddenly raise the stakes in a moral dilemma. It's how surviving a dangerous encounter means so much more because of the sacrifice it required or the emotional cost involved.
This whole framework, drawing from the ideas in the article, it really does offer a practical way to think about game design that goes beyond just rules and mechanics, doesn't it? It feels like it's about mastering the art of shared storytelling that doesn't just challenge the character skills, but really engages the player's hearts.
Yeah, elevates the game, I think. From just being a series of challenges to overcome to becoming a truly meaningful, memorable, collaborative, narrative experience for everyone involved.
So, to kind of wrap things up here, I think the most powerful insight, for me at least, is that the games we remember most fondly, the stories we end up telling years later, they aren't always about the highest damage roll or slaying the biggest dragon. They so often come from that shared emotion, right? The tension in a really quiet moment, the shared laughter during downtime, the genuine ache of a character's loss, or maybe the catharsis of forgiveness finally achieved.
And the truly exciting part, I think, is recognizing that as DMs, and even as players contributing to the story, we have the tools and the power to intentionally invite that kind of emotion to our tables. It's not some rare, unpredictable lightning strike. It's actually something we can consciously build towards using these kinds of techniques.
Yeah, it feels like how you transform a good game into something potentially legendary. And maybe, if emotion really is the secret alchemy, as the article suggests, perhaps the true magic in D&D isn't found in a spellbook or on a character sheet at all. Maybe it's found in those vulnerable, honest feelings shared between friends around the table.
That's definitely a thought worth pondering.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the emotional core of D&D. We really hope these insights give you some fuel, maybe some new ideas for your next session.